we'll see what happens. I think we have got Mr. Jackson ready to go. I'm going to pop him on here.
That'd be great.
Stanley,
Gentlemen,
how you doing today, sir?
I'm fabulous. It's a wonderful Sunday afternoon in Ohio.
Yes, sir. I love it. We appreciate you joining us today. I got to admit, I watched the 1997 Rose Bowl last night, and oh my God, it was just as amazing as it was the first time I saw it, buddy. It was a beautiful ball game. First, to give us some memories from that game because, God, I loved watching it.
Well, I mean, there's so many memories from that game. Not just the game, the era of Ohio State football. You know, as you remember or recall, it had been 20 years since Ohio State had made it to a Rose Bowl.
Yeah.
Year prior to that, I mean, we were loaded. We were a super team. Our offense, arguably still the greatest offense in college football history.
Oh, yeah.
When you think about the players, the names that were on that team, Terry Glenn, Eddie George, Orlando Pace, Bob Hoying, Rick Dudley. You know, Orlando has a gold jacket as an NFL Hall of Famer. So the names were there and everything was in place, and we fell short again against Michigan. And that was the theme for the John Cooper era. I actually jumped on Facebook about a week ago to correct the record for Coach John Cooper and how good he was. He's still the second winningest coach in Ohio State history.
Yeah.
The fewest games I ever won at Ohio State in my 5 years was 9.
Yeah.
And I don't think people realize that the amount of talent we had and how many games we actually won. So the buildup to that Rose Bowl was significant. We thought we were going to go the year before. That buildup was pretty special. We had clinched the berth prior to playing Michigan, and then again fell short in that game. Otherwise, we'd have been national champions. So it was pretty special just to head back out there to Pasadena to be a part of it. Everybody was pretty excited about it. Our fan base was excited. I mean, it's probably the most Ohio State fans they've ever had there because the gap was so long. And so, there are a bunch of great memories. I guess my fondest would probably be, the touchdown pass to David Boston to start the scoring. Very little space to put the ball in, and David still had to go out of bounds to secure it and get his feet in. So it was a spectacular play. And that one, will always go down in history.
When you were playing, I know hindsight's 2020. Did you realize at the moment, like, holy crap, this is like really special, like that? Or was it one of those things later on looking back on it that you were like, you couldn't believe the talent pool that you guys had there and what it turned into even later on in their post-collegiate career?
Yeah, I don't think we understood the amount of talent that was there. I think that part is evident. Now, we knew the Rose Bowl was special.
Yeah.
And we were fighting tooth and nail to get there. I mean, my 5 years, realistically, I could have 3 national championships.
Yeah.
John Cooper could go down as one of the greatest coaches in college football history. In 1993, we were loaded. Defensively, we had a powerful run game. Our offensive line was exceptional. And we lost one game. And that game, and we tied Wisconsin on the road, and they were pretty good. They had the 1-2 punch with Fletcher and Moss.
Yeah.
But that team was loaded. Raymond Harris was our starting tailback. We rotated quarterbacks, Brett Powers and Bob Hoying. But defensively, we had a lot of great players, and it was anchored by Dan Wilkinson, who was the #1 pick of the draft. You could have easily been a national champion that year. Had it been a playoff scenario, we would have made the playoff, and I think we'd have beat everybody in the country, quite frankly. It was just something about the Michigan game. We could not get over that hump. And then again, you go back to 95, where we probably had one of the more prolific offenses in the history of college football. And then 96, your defense is loaded. Antoine Winfield, who played 13, 14 years in the NFL, all pro, was our nickel. He didn't even start on that defense. Sean and Ty Howard were the guys who were anchoring the defense from the passing perspective. Andy Katzenmoyer was our middle linebacker. Luke Fickle, Mike Vrabel, 2 guys that were just voted coach of the year, were on that defensive line. Our strong safety was a guy by the name of Rob Kelly. Rob also had a short NFL career due to just head injuries. But you talk about a guy knocking your face off. The defense was special, and it was loaded. And, we had some good guys on the offensive end, too. You had mentioned David Boston earlier, who was there, and Mike Wiley. Our offensive line was very good. And so the opportunities that we had to play for national championships, I think, was strictly because of the talent. But we would fall short 1 week every year, and that was disappointing. And so, it was a special time. But we knew the Rose Bowl was special because there had been such a big gap in between the last time Ohio State had played in that game, and everybody was excited about the game.
There's no doubt. And, this brings me to my next question, because it's something we talked about a little bit earlier before you came on, Stanley, and something that, came out this week, that they're not going to expand the college football playoff, from 4 to 12 or anything, at least until 2025. And, my feelings about it are that there's teams that do get left out, and there's teams like those teams that you were on that, because of one game, didn't get a shot to compete for the national championship. And I think that expanding that playoff to 12 teams, I think that would take care of a lot of that. And I just want to get your thoughts on how the current 4-team playoff series stands, and what your thoughts are on possible expansion, whether you're in agreement with it or whether you like the way it is.
Well, no, I'm not in agreement with it. And I'm surprised that the Big Ten, the ACC, and the Big 12 voted against expansion, quite frankly. I mean, those are the conferences outside of the Pac-12 that have been left out most often.
Yeah.
In my opinion, you don't have a real playoff until you get people out of it.
Yeah.
When you have a selection committee, that tells you we have a problem.
Yeah.
We have 5 Power 5 conferences. In my opinion, it is an easy fix. This is an easy fix. The 5 conferences get an automatic bid, and then you have a 1 at-large bid, and that goes to the next highest ranked team.
Yeah.
Have the conferences do away with divisions and take the very best team out of it. The top 2 teams go into the start of the playoff, which would be the conference championship. And then again, you take the very next highest rated team after that. That way you take people out of it. Whenever you have people making these decisions, you're going to have problems. It's not skewed in one direction or the other. And I think that's what we find ourselves in. The committee has given us all sorts of excuses as to why they've left certain teams out. And let's be honest about this. You go back to the very first playoff that Ohio State was privileged to be in and won it all. The reality is the Buckeyes probably shouldn't have been in it.
Yeah.
Going into the last weekend, they were behind 2 Big 12 teams.
Yeah.
And, based on factors that the committee has never really been honest about, the Buckeyes were able to sneak in. The Buckeyes have been favored twice in that. We were the first team not to be a conference champion to get into that. So I think you got to figure out, how can we take people out of the scenario in selecting who's playing for a national championship? You don't have that, in the NFL or any other level. You don't have that in Division II when it comes to college football 1A or Division I AA. Their playoff is set by seeding based on, how many games you win in the year. Basketball is a little different. I know they have the selection committee, but you have all those automatic bids that put teams in it that deserve it right away. Now, as far as 12 teams, I'm not sure I agree with that. I don't think you have 12 teams in college football that are good enough to compete for a national championship. I don't think it's like the NFL where you have parity across the board and you can have a wild card team like the Giants knock off an undefeated Patriots team in the championship because their defense got really hot.
Yeah.
I think 8 should probably be your max. I think 6 would be a good number, but I would cap it at 8. And again, I would take the selection committee out of it. I would grant automatic bids to the Power 5 conferences, and then maybe 1 automatic bid to the group of 5, and then the next 2 teams are the 2 highest seeded teams if you wanted to get to 8, to make it a more balanced level playing field. But you think about college football this year, if you go all the way down to 12 teams, that 12 team is, it could get the brakes beat off of them by the number 1 team in the country.
I agree.
Now, going back a little bit, talk about your recruiting process. I mean, I know you went to Patterson Catholic. Was there a lot of pressure, since you were an East Coast guy, to go to a BC, a Syracuse, or an East Coast school? And how did that affect what was your decision process, and who was the assistant coach that recruited you to Ohio State? Like, what was that all about? How'd that feel at the time?
Well, I had an older brother that was really good. He played 6 games as a senior before he blew his knee out. And, this is back in 1989, and he had 1,000 yards passing at the time. I mean, that was like unheard of. Yeah. He blew his ACL out, and back then in 1989, that was like a death sentence, right? You and no one thought you were good enough. And so he really didn't get to experience the recruiting process. My mother went to a community college. My father never graduated from high school. He's a hardworking American who had kids early and went to work. So it wasn't like my parents or anyone in my circle really understood the process. Now, my high school coach, Amon Lou Mathis, he played football at the Ohio State University. So he was the one that sort of navigated the space for us. And quite frankly, he was always pushing me towards Ohio State. And so I had known about Ohio State since my sophomore in high school, talking to him. And, I took a handful of visits, not really understanding why I should pick those certain schools. At the time, Rutgers, my home state, wanted me to play defensive back. So that wasn't going to happen because I was a quarterback. I did go to Syracuse and I went to Kansas, but really, I went to the places where coaches were calling me the most. Didn't look at whether or not those schools had a history of playing black quarterbacks. We didn't look at what offenses those schools were running, whether it would fit me. It was just, these places were calling me, and my coach wanted me to go to Ohio State. So in hindsight, we really didn't know what we were doing, quite frankly. And, we kind of got lucky. And look, my career wasn't the greatest at Ohio State. I had a lot of challenges. I'm not sure the community really wanted a black quarterback at that time, to be honest with you. I received a lot of hate mail, and I spent my fair share fighting for the job, only because, quite frankly, I think I should have picked a coaching staff that really, truly understood a black quarterback back then, because it's different. Coach Mike Stock was the guy who recruited me. That's the guy who recruited me. He was our receivers coach. He was phenomenal. He was outstanding. He could sell ice to an Eskimo. And he ultimately left and went to the NFL to be a special teams coach. And so I didn't have him to lean on either. But, I was more like black quarterbacks historically, because we grew up in different communities, from a perspective of attitude and how you attack the game, especially when you're an athlete, you're more like DBs. You're a little more arrogant, a little more cocky. The way you play the game is different. And that's not what historically, back in even in the late 90s, coaches were looking for in a quarterback. Yeah. Coaches were looking for more of the all-American kid that was going to do things that everybody was supposed to do and wasn't so cocky and spent a bunch of time watching film. And that just wasn't me. And the reality is, I think we're starting to see a significant change in how black quarterbacks are produced out of these different communities, because now they're coming in with a better understanding of the offense. They throw the ball better. They're more accurate. When you look at CJ Stroud, he may be one of the more accurate quarterbacks we've ever had in the history of Ohio State football. And so that dichotomy is changing significantly how quarterbacks are trained. I mean, my high school coach used to tell me, if this kid isn't open, you make something happen. Yeah. Well, that's not the case in high school anymore. These kids are learning how to go through a progression. And then the other thing that really helps the college quarterback or the high school quarterback make the transition, and we're actually seeing it at the college to the NFL level now, is that the systems are so similar. Yeah. Everybody's running a version of the spread, right? The spread isn't an offense, it's a concept, but everybody's running a concept of the spread. So quarterbacks understand it more. And quite frankly, it's a lot easier. I mean, I was just having this conversation with a couple of friends. Think about this. I mean, people forget how difficult it was to go on a 2-minute drive. Joe Rain put one together, right? To end the Rose Bowl. We had 3 pass interference calls, thank God, on that drive. But when you had 2 receivers and a tight end that were going out on routes, and the defense had 3 linebackers, maybe 2 linebackers, a nickel, and 4 secondary guys, it was very difficult to go down and score with 2 minutes. And that's why guys like Joe Montana are so special. Yeah. Now, the offense spreads you out. Defensively, you got real problems. Number one, you can't hit anybody anymore, so the intimidation factor is taken away from the game. Oh, yeah. And ultimately, you find yourselves with a one-on-one opportunity where you didn't get that in the late 90s. And a lot of teams that, if you look at, I don't know if you guys have watched Canadian football, but Canadian football was kind of ahead of the curve because it was a wide open game. You only had 3 downs. And a lot of what you see from offense and defense today in college and in the NFL, you saw in Canada. And Canada had this match concept on defense. It was like a match-up zone. So it's really a zone, but soon as someone enters your zone, now it's a man-to-man for you. So if you're watching the Super Bowl and you're wondering how Cooper Kupp ends up on a linebacker, like what defensive coordinator would have a linebacker covering, a receiver who's having one of the greatest years in the history of NFL football? Well, it's a defense. Cooper lines up at a position. If he goes inside, the linebacker is the only guy inside. He ends up playing man on that, and he ends up grabbing Cooper, right, clutching for his life, hoping to stop a touchdown. Well, those are the concepts you see now. So it's made the game a lot easier. I know it's a convoluted answer to get back to my experience and how just things have changed for the black quarterback. It was different for me at Ohio State. I think it's a lot better now. And the game really is suited towards athletic quarterbacks.
Yeah.
Those guys who can make plays in space, like a Joe Burrow, who can absolutely run. Who thing ran for like an absurd number of touchdowns when he was in high school down in Athens, has really thrived at the next level because the systems are so similar all the way from his high school playing days.
Yeah, no, that's what we were talking about a little bit earlier when we were discussing you coming on the show, Stanley. We both kind of felt like you were ahead of your time in a lot of ways, both culturally and also, football wise. I mean, I people thought of you as a running quarterback, but when I was watching that game last night, you could sling it too, man. I mean, I just saw the quarterbacks that are playing right now, the Kyler Murrays, the Jalen Hurts, the guys that Lamar's, everybody that's out there playing now. I saw that a lot of that, your game and those guys, or their game and yours. And I feel like, that's kind of the evolution of the position is more suited to your game now, and the offenses that exist now. I think you would thrive in with your skill set. You got any thoughts on that?
No, I agree with you. I think, coaches have gotten smarter, right? And, historically, even at the top level in the NFL, you pay these guys all this money, they still had a system and they wanted to find a guy that fit their system. And I think an evolution in that now. Coaches are realizing we need to take the best guy available and fit a system that makes sense for that particular player. And Baltimore is doing a fantastic job of that with Lamar Jackson. Now, I put him in a separate category because the way he runs, he's like a tailback. I mean, he's pretty but you see the same thing with Jalen Hurts. You see the same thing with Kyler Murray. You see the same thing with Patrick Mahomes. I mean, you see the same thing with Allen in Buffalo, where, the coaches are now realizing, look, we've got a special guy at the quarterback position. Let's take advantage of that. Now, here's what the NFL has done to help that. Because back in 1995, you wouldn't want to do that with an NFL quarterback because you have him running in the secondary and linebackers want to take care of him.
Yeah,
I'll never forget. I grew up in New Jersey, big Giant fan. But Joe Montana, in my opinion, is the greatest quarterback to ever play. And I believe it was 1991, and San Francisco was letting the Giants have it in the playoffs until Jim Burt peeled around on a twist and almost decapitated Joe Montana.
Mm-hmm.
Put him out of the game, and it changed from there. The game was over. The Giants took over, went on to win a Super Bowl. In today's game, Joe Montana would still be out, but he wouldn't take a hit like that because what would happen is the defender, once he got close to engage, he would go to the only area where you can hit an NFL quarterback, and that's between the shoulders and the waist belt.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be a head hit. He would be laid out across the floor. So the NFL has gotten smart about that. We're going to use quarterbacks the way these offenses allow us to use them. We have to protect them. I'm also a guy that really believes that the quarterback position is highly overrated, quite frankly. Everybody thinks you need to get a great quarterback to win a championship. That is not the case. We've seen great teams go through and win championships because they're built around a solid defense or a great run game. But the position can take you over the hump. And that's where we see a real change due to this offense that has permeated all of football. We've never seen this before, by the way. We've never seen a concept of football offensively that starts now. Look, I got a sixth grader. We run the spread in the sixth grade.
That's crazy.
I've got a freshman at Westerville North High School and a junior that will be the starting backfield next year. They run the spread. You go down and to the Horseshoe on Saturday. We watch the spread there. And then, you go up to Cleveland, down to Cincinnati, and these teams are running a version of the spread. It's amazing how this concept has just caught fire and it's run everywhere. I mean, in football, typically there's a cycle of how you run offense and defense. Things come back. And I do see a cycle coming back to power football. You see more fullbacks in the NFL now, tight ends being used. But, we've had times where there have been offenses that have come out. Everybody doesn't use them. Everybody didn't go to the West Coast offense. Everybody didn't go to the run and shoot offense, right? Everybody didn't run the wing T offense at one point. But, now everybody has some component of the spread. It's a unique time in the history of football that the first defense that truly catches up to figure out how to start it will be a team that's going to be how to stop it is a team that's going to be pretty special.
Who is that player or coach that person that really helped develop you, not only as a player, but more importantly as a person? Not only, that really you take their advice even from today of things they told you way back when.
Yeah, that's a good question. For me, it's more than one guy. Obviously, it starts with my father and my brother, two men who helped mold me as a young quarterback. And then I told you, Amon Lou Mathis was my high school quarterback who played at my high school coach who played at Ohio State. He played strong safety there. Ultimately played in the USFL. He's the guy that I listen to. So I don't know how this happened, but early on in life, I realized that you can learn from anybody. And I think I was just lucky stumbling on that, to be honest with you. As an example, Walt Harris probably was the best offensive mind I was ever around. But Walt could be a real jerk. Walt could be a real jerk. I'll give you guys a great story. This was my junior year. We're undefeated. And as a matter of fact, no, it is not my junior year. It's my redshirt sophomore year. We are undefeated. Bob Hoying is our starting quarterback. And we're running plays at the Woody Hayes in the indoor facility. And I take off and I run a touchdown. And I run a touchdown into the corner end zone. It's not even close. Nobody's around me. But I'm holding the ball in one hand as I run by. Coach Harris doesn't say a word to me. We continue practice. At the end of practice, Coach Harris starts to tell a story about a Hall of Fame All-Pro quarterback. He was talking about John Elway, watching this guy run with the ball in one hand and knocked it off of his knee and fumbled the ball in the game where it was important. And none of my quarterbacks are going to run with the ball like that and knock it off their knee and fumble the ball. So because of that, Stan, you're doing a fumble drill. So here we are at the end of practice, and he's throwing the ball, bouncing it everywhere off the turf, old school turf, in the Woody Hayes athletic facility as I'm running around jumping on the football. Now, I thought it was a little unfair. I didn't fumble the ball, Coach. That was John Elway. You should have him do the drill. but Coach, he's had a hard, stern approach. So he's the guy that I would always listen to when in regards to football, but he was a tough guy to get along with sometimes because he could be a real jerk. And then, honestly, I had a guy by the name of Anthony Cavillo, who was a Hall of Fame quarterback in the CFL. I forgot where Anthony played college football, somewhere out west. And Anthony Cavillo was one of the best quarterbacks I've ever seen play the game of football. He's a Hall of Famer in Canada. He threw for a bunch of yards. And he was really the guy that really taught me the nuance of the quarterback position when I spent time with him with the Montreal Alouettes.
Nice. Hey, last one for me, Stanley. I just want to get your thoughts on a former teammate of yours that we talked about a little bit earlier that played on that D line. And now is the head coach at Cincinnati, and that's your boy Fickle there. He had a tremendous season, and I really like what he's done. Building that program down there. Obviously, when he took over for Tressel, it was a very, very tough season, and I thought he did a great job. Honestly, as a Buckeye fan, I thought he did a tremendous job keeping that team together and playing as well as they did. And I was very happy that he got a shot to be a head coach down there. And I think he's done an amazing job with the Bearcats and building that program up. As a former teammate of his, I just want to get your thoughts on him as a coach and whether you saw, traits from him as a player that would translate.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that you saw that we all noticed early on was that he was a fighter.
Oh, yeah.
Tough as nails. I mean, he's an undersized nose guard.
Oh, yeah.
Back in the day, where
all-state wrestler too.
All-state wrestler, but it was a different brand of football. My kids watch it and call it dinosaur football. Most teams ran in the Big Ten. Everybody ran the ball 75% of the time, straight downhill, off tackle. And Luke was in that trench, and he was undersized and undermanned, and he did a hell of a job as a 4-year starter for Ohio State. That's very, very rare. And then I think he understood his limitations early on. The rest of us went on to hope and pray and claw our way back into the NFL by going through, arena football or Canada. And Luke right away knew, no, that's not the lane for me. Let me jump into coaching. And so he was acutely aware of who he was, his ability, but he was a hell of a fighter. And I think you see that permeate throughout his teams, quite frankly. And he's done a bang-up job. I think we're very proud of him as an Ohio State alumni. I mean, he's at Cincinnati. Now they're jumping into the Big 12, so he's a Power 5 team. and the first group of 5 to make it into a playoff, which is significant, quite frankly. If you look at some of the teams that have knocked on that door, Cincinnati was the one to kick it down. That's historic.
Yeah,
and I think it's all a testament to Luke's ability to connect with his players.
Yeah.
And at his time at Ohio State, I mean, think about the number of players where Urban Meyer didn't want them. Darren Lee is the first guy that sort of springs to mind. Urban didn't want him. Darren Lee becomes an all-time, Ohio State linebacker.
Yeah.
So he's got an eye for talent, and he knows how to develop it. The only knock that I've ever given Luke Fickell as a coach was the one year he was the head coach at Ohio State. I thought he was too passive on the offensive side.
Yeah.
I thought he gave those coaches too much leeway. I really felt like had he taken the reins, the horse by the reins that particular season, he may still be Ohio State's head coach. I mean, and I never want to knock any particular player, but they absolutely made the wrong choice at quarterback that year.
Yeah.
If I'm Kenny Guyton, I may still want to.
I think we lost this. There we go.
Are you guys there?
Yeah, we lost your audio.
Yeah.
We heard Kenny Guyton.
Kenny Guyton was supposed to be the choice of quarterback that year. I believe they went with Bowserman. He wasn't really ready. Then ultimately they went to Braxton Miller, who was very dynamic, but still wasn't the best all-around quarterback. Braxton ends up becoming an all-star. But at the time, Kenny Guyton was the best quarterback on that team. And he proved that when he came in and saved our bacon twice.
Yeah.
Years to come. And that's the one area I thought Luke made a big mistake in allowing that coaching staff to go to a kid that was not the best quarterback, because that year would have been different for him, and they would have won more games had he made a different choice.
No, that's a great point. I didn't even remember that.
One last question before we wrap up is, what advice would you give? Did we lose him?
No, I'm still here. Sorry.
Sorry. What advice would you now that you look back on your career, and what advice would you give a future player going into college, or a future coach that wants to get into college, looking back on what you've gone through that you wish you would have known back then?
That's great. I've got 3 boys that I'm hoping all will have an opportunity to play college football at some level. And the first thing I tell them, this is a little counterintuitive to be honest with you, but the first thing I tell them is that football isn't everything. Football isn't everything. Don't put all your eggs in that basket. And remember that at some point it's going to be taken from you, unless you become a coach. And even then, you have to retire. The one thing I noticed about football players, which is different than any other sport, is we all experience some form of depression when the game is over.
Oh, yeah.
Some of it a lot worse than others. And I think part of the reason for that is because the void of football can't be filled anywhere else. If you're a great basketball player, you can suit up for a church league until you're 65.
Yeah.
Put the uniform on, have a team, practice once a week, feel good about it. Same thing with baseball, right? Same thing with hockey. You see these leagues. Football, nobody's going out to play football and then go to work on Monday. When it's over, it's over. The camaraderie of the locker room, the number of players, it's done. And football is simply the greatest game because it's poetry in motion. Mm-hmm. I work now. We own a bank called Buckeye State Bank. Tomorrow we'll have our annual event where we do some training. We talk about team. And so I'm going to show some clips from the Ohio State national championship run to show why football is important. It takes 11 guys that are on the field to do their job at the same time to have success. One guy messes up and the play blows up. Offensive line can block perfectly. Quarterback takes his drop, goes through a great read, delivers a dime. If the receiver doesn't look it in, the play is a failure.
Yep.
Right? If your offensive tackle gets his feet together, gets knocked on his tail, even though the rest of the line is blocking, even though the receivers are wide open and the quarterback sees it, he gets hit in his back because of one guy. That's why football is the greatest sport there ever was, because you can't take it over with one player. You can't have one dominant pitcher on the mound that just shuts down the other team, or a goalie that shuts down the other team, or Michael Jordan that comes in and gets one other player and goes on a 6-game undefeated championship run. That doesn't happen in football. You need people to do their job. I don't care how good your quarterback is. Peyton Manning went years before he won a playoff game until they had a team in place and the right coach in place. And so I always tell them, don't make football the most important thing, because it may be taken away from you, but it is something that you're going to love and remember for the rest of your life, because it's going to teach you lessons that will carry you beyond the game. So that's what I tell my kids. And then the next thing is, if you really want this, don't get outworked. It's just that simple. Don't get outworked. Your talent will only take you so far. But if you understand the game, my son that will be a sophomore as a quarterback, if you know where the ball's supposed to go before everybody else, you'll be fine. But if you're struggling to make that decision, then you're going to be in trouble. So, yeah, I mean, it's a very tough question, because everything I have in life, I can really, attribute back to the game of football, giving me a lot of things, teaching you how to compete, teaching you how to get up when you're knocked down. And then obviously having the chance to play at Ohio State, being introduced to folks where I was able to raise some money to be a part of this bank project. So football has given me a lot. And I want my kids to understand that. But at the same time, it may not work out the way that you want it to. And you have to be prepared for that, because for 99.9% of us, it does not work out the way that we want it to. We all want to play a long time in the NFL, and that's just not the case. And you have to be prepared for that afterwards.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt. And Stanley, we just want to thank you so much, man, for being here today. We loved getting a chance to talk to you. We loved watching you play. You were always one of my favorites back in the day for the Buckeyes, and I love hearing you on Big Ten Network too. So thank you so much for taking some time on Sunday morning to talk some ball with us.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Anytime. Let me know.
All right, Stanley. Have a good one, man. We'll talk to you again real soon, okay?
Yep. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.